Hello students, welcome to Distinction Learning Platform, and on this platform you find explanation to difficult topics, you find revisions, you find quizzes, tests, a lot of stuff. So before we begin our lessons, make sure that you subscribe so that you can be updated with our upcoming videos. To make the story short, let us begin. In this video, we are talking about mechanism of cell injury, and remember that we are under general pathology, okay, and this is cell injury. And remember that this is for preclinical student, and all the concept that we're getting from what? Robbins, which is the one of the recommended book. Okay, so remember that we talked about cell injury in previous videos. We talked about the types of cell injury, the causes of cell injury, a lot of stuff. So make sure that you watch all the other videos so that now you can fully understand this video. Okay, so one of the mechanisms of cell injury are one of the most important mechanisms of cell injury are that is mitochondrial damage, influx of calcium, ATP depletion, and the last one is accumulation of what? The free radicals that we'll talk about on the last part there. Okay, so now remember that why is it important to understand the mechanism of cell injury? Remember that mechanism of cell injury, these are the ones that are going to lead to what? Morphological features that we talked about, either in irreversible cell injury or irreversible cell injury. So we talked about the fat chain, talked about cellular swelling, we talked about a lot of morphological features, the nuclear changes, a lot of them. So how does cellular swelling comes about? It is because of what? Mechanism of cell injury. So before we go to mitochondrial damage, influx of calcium, and the other types of what? Mechanism of cell injury, let us talk about the principles of what? Cell injury. So what are the principles of cell injury? So principles of cell injury, it has come to the understanding that it depends on some various factors. What are those factors? The first one is what? The type of stimuli that is there. What is the first one? Type of the stimuli. Okay, the type of the stimuli that the cell is exposed to, then it will cause some various mechanism that we'll talk about. Okay, the type of stimuli is very, very important. So type of the stimuli, also on the stimuli, the duration of the stimuli as well. Okay, so why am I talking about that? Because if you look at a good example, like if you talk about the skeletal muscles of the thigh, they're going to withstand a certain stimuli for about maybe 2 to 3 hours. Unlike the cardiac muscles, they are going to withstand only for 20 to 30 minutes that same injurious stimuli, and they are going to lead into what? Irreversible cell injury. So no wonder it's very, very important to study about the type of the stimuli, the duration of the stimuli, and what other principle that is very, very important. Also the type of what? Type of a cell. Like the good example that I'm talking about, cardiac cells and also the skeletal what? Muscle, they respond differently to the what? To the stimuli, okay, as well as the genetic makeup of the cells or individuals. Okay, they're going also to be part of the principles of cell injury. Okay, now since we've talked about the principles of the cell injury, then what else are we supposed to talk about? Now let's go into details when it comes to mitochondrial damage. So mitochondrial damage, remember that mitochondria is one of the important organelle. Why? Because it is involved in the production of what? ATP, adenosine triphosphate. Very, very important. So these organelles, if they get damaged because of some various causes that we'll talk about, they are going to cause cell injury. Okay, now how does it lead to that? Okay, so firstly, let's talk about the causes of mitochondrial damage. We know there are a lot of causes, but let's talk about the most common causes of what? Mitochondrial damage. What is that? The first one is what? Hypoxia, or let's put or ischemia. That's the first one. And remember that what is hypoxia? We said hypoxia is what? Inadequate oxygenation of what? Blood. What is ischemia? Ischemia is inadequate oxygenation of what? Tissues. That's the difference between ischemia and hypoxia. Okay. Okay, now since we've talked about what the first cause of that, if there is inadequate oxygenation of tissues or inadequate oxygenation of what? Blood, there will be what? Mitochondrial damage. That's the first cause. What is the second cause? The second cause is what? Chemicals. Chemicals, so like chemical agents, these are also one of the cause of what? Mitochondrial damage. Like cyanide. Cyanide is a very like poisonous substance that can cause what? Mitochondrial damage, because it interferes with what? Respiratory the production of what? ATP in the electron transport system. Okay, so very important. So I'm talking, a good example of a chemical is what we call cyanide. Okay, cyanide can what? Damage the mitochondria. What else? The last one. Let's talk about the last one, which is remember that also if you look at some various things like radiation. Okay, so radiation is something that can damage the mitochondria. How? Because radiation is one of the things that can produce reactive oxygen species that can in turn affect the mitochondria, making it to get damaged. So those are the three important causes of what? Mitochondrial damage: radiation, chemicals, and what? Hypoxia or ischemia. Okay. Now, if there's damage due to these causes, then what will happen to the mitochondria? What are the downstream mechanisms that's going to be resulted from? Okay. What's the first one? The first one is what? ATP depletion. Okay. So there will be what? Raw production of what? ATP. Production of ATP is going to be what? Reduced. Very important. Now, if ATP is what? Reduced or is depleted, like here. So we'll talk about what will happen if ATP is going to be what? Depleted. Here we'll just say if ATP is depleted due to mitochondrial damage, it will lead to what? Basically, it will lead to just one thing. We know it is necrosis. Okay, it will lead to just one thing, which is what? Necrosis. Very important. If there is severe depletion of ATP due to because of mitochondria, it will lead to what? Necrosis. But we'll talk about the mechanism of the downstream of depleting ATP here. Okay, so that's the first thing. Then what's the second thing? If there is mitochondrial damage due to those causes, what's the second thing? Okay, the second thing is what? The second thing is this one. Okay, I'll use this one. So there will be accumulation of what? ROS. Okay. So the second thing is what? Accumulation of what? ROS. Reactive oxygen what? Species. And remember that, don't worry, we'll talk about the reactive oxygen species here. Accumulation of free radicals, we'll talk about them. The types of free radicals, we'll talk about them. Okay, if there is reactive oxygen species, these they are going to what? This start damaging the what? The cell, leading to what? Necrosis as usual. Also, this one is going to lead to what? Necrosis, because it is damaging the what? The cell. What else? The last one, there will be what? Because there is damage to mitochondria, and there will be what? There will be increase in the what? There will be increase in the permeability membrane of the what? Mitochondria. Okay. So what are we saying? The other thing is, if there is mitochondrial damage, we're increasing the what? Permeability of the what? Mitochondria. Now, so there's various things that can happen if you increase the permeability of the mitochondria. Then what will happen? The first thing what will happen is this one. Okay. The first thing that will happen is what? Further depletion of what? Further depletion of what? ATP, leading to what? Necrosis. Okay. You further decrease ATP, because also ATP production depends on the what? Permeability of the mitochondria. Okay. So it will lead to that. What else? Remember that if you increase the permeability of the mitochondria, there is also another type of cell death. Okay, because if you increase the permeability of the mitochondria, basically it's going to be promoting the activation of what? Apoptotic factors, and decreasing the apoptotic factors, leading to what? Apoptosis. Very important point. Okay, so what is the other? So this is very important. I'm going to use the blue marker. Okay, it's going to lead to what? Increased permeability. It's going to lead to what? Apoptosis. Very, very important point. Okay, so that's about the mitochondrial damage. Okay, so since we've talked about it, the various things that can lead to the mechanism on how a cell, if there is a mitochondrial damage, on how a cell can lead to what necrosis and apoptosis. If there is what mitochondrial damage due to hypoxia chemicals like cyanide and the radiation. Okay, so now let's start with this one. So we said we talk about the downstream of depletion of ATP. Okay, so let's come here. Okay, so if there is depletion of ATP, okay, so what is ATP? Remember we said ATP is what? It's the energy that's going to be produced because there is the oxidative phosphorylation of what? ADP. Okay, there will be production of that. Okay, so ATP is a one important type of energy that is mostly used by almost all the cells, so that a cell can promote a lot of processes, maybe protein synthesis, lipolysis, like oxidative phosphorylation, a lot of things that are what happening in the body. They depend on what? ATP. Now, imagine to say, now if there is depletion of ATP, what's going to happen? Okay, and remember that the causes of depletion for ATP, basically we can just say hypoxia or ischemia. Maybe there is an obstruction to the what? So one of the important cause of ischemia is maybe there's an obstruction in the blood vessels. Okay, if there is an obstruction in the blood vessels due to thrombosis, embolization, a lot of stuff, then they can lead to what? Depletion of ATP. Okay, so if there's depletion of ATP, now what are the downstream effects? We'll start with the first one. Okay, the first one is what? What is the first one? So the first one is this one. There will be what? Failure of what? This one, sodium pumps. So failure of sodium what? Pumps. Because if you remember that, if you look at the cell membrane of any cell, they are what we call sodium potassium pumps. Okay, so now if there is no ATP, so those sodium dependent ATP pumps, they depend on ATP for them to start working. Now if there is a decreased amount of ATP, then these sodium pumps, they are going to what? To decrease according to their functionality. Okay, if they decrease according to their functionality, what's going to happen? Then they will lead to something else that is very dangerous. What are those things? So there is decrease in sodium pumps working, then it will lead to what? Okay, it will lead to this one. Then there will be influx of sodium. Okay, sodium in the cell, so influx, so sodium influx, so there will be sodium influx and what? Potassium ions influx. Okay, so two things. So sodium influx. Basically, so sodium influx, what do I mean? So if there is a failure of what? Sodium potassium pumps, so sodium will start rushing into the what? Into the cell, then potassium will start moving out of the cell, because now they are basically not using energy. Mind you that sodium is a lot from outside the cell in the extracellular what? Space, so it's a lot there, mean that it will just now go start rushing into the what? Into the cell, because it will just going from high potential into lower potential. Basically it will start just diffusing into the what? Into the cell. So that's the main reason why sodium will start going into the cell, and the potassium will start going what? Going outside the cell, because outside the cell there's low potassium, inside the cell there's what? High potassium level. So it will just follow that the potential there. Okay, the concentration there. Okay, so if this happens, now there is potassium sodium influx and the potassium efflux, then what will happen? Also there is something that is very important that likes to follow what? Sodium. If sodium is going into the what? Into the cell, there is a certain molecule that is very important, which is what? Water. So there will be what? Water influx as well. Okay, so water will start going into the cell because it also likes sodium. Where sodium is going, also water likes following. Okay, now you can see something here. If water is going to the cell and sodium is going into a cell, then the cell will look big, right? Okay, so because water is inside the cell, then the cell will start what? Swelling. So it will lead to what? Cellular swelling. Okay, Now, a cell swells, then what else? Also another important thing that is going to swell, which is the endoplasmic reticulum, which is the ER. ER is going to swell as well. ER swelling as well. Okay. Okay, there will be ER swelling. Very, very important. Now, if there is swelling or an ER swelling, there is important concept that you need to understand. Then, if the ER, you remember that under the rough endoplasmic reticulum, there are some ribosomes that are attached to that reticulum, the endoplasmic reticulum. Then, if there are some ribosome, now if the ER is swelling, then what will happen to the ribosome? The ribosome will start detaching from the ER. Okay. So if the ER swells, then it will lead to what? It will lead to detachment of what? Detachment of what? Ribosomes. Okay. Now, that detachment of ribosomes, remember that ribosomes are important in what? Protein synthesis. Basically, it will lead to what? Decrease in what? Protein synthesis. So the last important thing is that it will lead to what? Decrease in what? Protein synthesis. That's a very, very important point to understand. Okay, so basically that's from the simple thing, the failure of sodium pumps, saying to lead to what? The decrease in what? Protein synthesis, and also leading to what? Cellular what? Swelling. Very, very important point. Okay, boom, boom. We are done with what? Failure of sodium pumps. Then let's go to another point where there is also another important thing. Okay. Now imagine something. If a cell, there is what? Depletion of ATP here. There is depletion of ATP here. Then what do you think the cell is going to start getting energy from? They need to start using another what? Way to get more ATP. What is that? Glycolysis. Very, very important. So it will lead to what? Glycolysis. So what are we saying? So a cell will start using up what? Glycolysis. Okay. So it will start using up what? Glycolysis. So it will increase that glycolysis metabolic pathway. It's going to be what? Increase. Why? Because it has to what? Counteract this decrease in the ATP production by the what? Mitochondria. So it will start using glycolysis. Remember that the glycolysis is independent of the what? Mitochondria. Okay, so it will start bring about that. Now, what are the consequences of increasing the glycolysis reaction rate? What is that consequence? The first consequence is this one. Okay, what are those consequences? The first one is what? Okay, it will start depleting the what? Glycogen what? Stores in the cell. So it will start what? Decreasing what? The first one is what? It will start decreasing glycogen stores. So why decreasing glycogen stores? Because it is using up those glycogen molecules to make energy. Okay, to make energy, because glycogen will be converted into what? Glucose, and glucose will be now used to make what? ATP. Boom, boom. Very, very important point. Okay, that's the first thing that it will do. Another thing, very, very important. Okay, what else? What else apart from decreasing glycogen stores? What else? Okay, so the other important thing about that is if there is if it is depending on glycogen stores, then what will happen? What will happen to the acid? So there will be production of what? Lactic acid. Very, very important point. So here again, there will be increase in the production of what? Increase in the production of what? Lactic what? Acid. Very, very important. So there will be increase in the production of what? Lactic acid. If there is increase in the production of lactic acid, what do you think the intracellular pH will do? So intracellular pH, so what's going to happen to the intracellular pH? Because there is increase in the lactic acid, then what will happen to the intracellular pH? It's going to decrease the intracellular pH. So this one is going to decrease the intracellular pH. Basically, it's making the the cell to become the cell to become what? Acidic, or to have acidic what? pH. Now what is the consequence of having acidic pH? It's this one. Okay, so the consequence of having what? Acidic pH is what? In the cell, it's going to what? Deactivate some certain enzymes. So the first one is what? It's going to deactivate, okay, deactivate enzymes, okay, deactivate some certain enzymes that will lead to a various effect. Okay, what else? The other thing that's going to happen because of this decrease in what? Decrease in the pH, there will be what? Clamping of what? Clamping of, okay, clamping of the chromatin. Okay, there will be clamping of the chromatin there. So the DNA base will start what? Condensing, clamping like that. Maybe leading to what? The shrinkage of the what? The nucleus there. Okay, so those are the very important points that you need to take if there is what? Decrease in pH due to what? Accumulation of lactic acid that decreases what? pH, and the pH decrement in the pH leading to what? The activation of what? Enzymes, and what? It will lead to what? Also clamping of the what? Chromatin, basically the shrinkage of the what? Nucleus. Okay, so those are the deleterious effect that will happen if there is what? Increase in what? Glycolysis. What else? What else? So very important as well, another point. So another point, if there is decrease in the ATP production, what else? Also there will be a failure of another pump. So there is what we call a ATP dependent calcium pumps. Very important. So here we say sodium pumps. Here we are talking about it. Decrease in what? Calcium pumps. So calcium that are depending on what? Calcium pumps that are depending on ATP. They will be what? That. Okay. Now, if there is decrease in calcium pumps, what do you think will happen? Here we said from oxygen, we said from sodium, we said sodium will start going into the cell. What about calcium? Also calcium, if the pumps are failing for calcium, calcium will start what? Going into the cell. So here there will be what? Influx of what? Influx of calcium, okay, ions into the what? Into the cell. If now there is lot of calcium into the cell, it will lead to what? It will lead to activation of what? A lot of enzymes. So activation of what? Enzymes. So activation of lot of what? Enzymes. So activation of what? Enzyme. A lot of enzyme like we've got phospholipases, proteases, endonucleases, a lot of enzymes that are going to be activated, so that those enzymes, if they're activated now, they'll start eating up a cell, destroying a cell. Whether it will start destroying the cytoskeleton of the cell, maybe the nucleus, a lot of stuff that's going to happen. And we'll talk about the various thing that will happen when it comes to what? Accumulation of calcium into the cell here from here. So just know that if there is activation of enzymes there, then it will lead to what? It will lead to what? Necrosis of the what? Of the cell, because of the accumulation of calcium in the cell. So what are we saying? So what is the result of when you activate that? It is what? Necrosis of the cell. So necrosis will come about because those enzymes that are being activated, they are very what? Toxic. They lead to what? Necrosis. Okay. And there is also another thing that that calcium can do. It can also lead to what? Activation of what? Some certain enzymes like the caspases that are important in what? Apoptosis. Basically, what I'm saying is also accumulation of calcium in a cell can lead to what? Apoptosis process, which is a programmed cell death. Okay. Boom. We are done with what? ATP depletion. Very important and very simple what? Concept. Then let's go to what? Influx of what? Calcium, which is this part. Okay. Influx of calcium. What could be the cause of that? Basically, the cause is just the same. Remember that? What are the causes of that? Basically, just know the three causes: radiation. Okay. What are the other causes? Hypoxia, ischemia, and what? the chemicals, okay, can it what also increasing the what intracellular calcium. Okay, now remember that calcium can come from different places, right? Make sure that you understand it doesn't just always come from extracellular space or from extracellular fluid there then going to the cell because of the hypoxia and other things. It can also come from what in the intracellular space as well, in the cell as well. The ER can produce calcium. The mitochondria can also produce calcium. Okay, there are three main sources. Extracellular, okay, calcium can the calcium can come from the extracellular space, or it can come from within the cell. From where? ER, which is the smooth endoplasmic reticulum. What else? Also from the mitochondria. Can what? Can increase the calcium levels due to the same causes that we are talking about. If there is mitochondrial damage, if there is maybe hypoxia, a lot of things that can cause intracellular accumulation of what? Calcium. Okay. So now, since basically we know that okay, there is increased calcium levels in the cell. Now, what are those things that are going to be what happening in the what in the cell if there is accumulation of calcium? So if there is accumulation of calcium in the cell, remember that now it will start activating what enzymes as we talked about here. So it will start activating what enzymes. Okay. What's the first thing it will do? Activation of what? Enzymes. That's the first thing. Okay. So what kind of enzyme is it going to activate? What kind of enzyme is it going to activate? Okay. There are a lot of enzymes that is going to activate. The first one is what? Let's start with the phospholipase. Okay. So it's going to activate what? Phospholipases. So it's going to activate phospholipases. Okay. So it's going to activate phospholipase. So phospholipase now, what does it do? So phospholipase, just from the word lipase, basically it will start breaking down what? The lipids or phospholipids. I mean, phospholipid. If it's breaking down the phospholipid, then basically it will break down the membranes. So it is leading to the what? Breaking down of what? Membranes. Okay. Of what? Membranes. Okay. Breaking down of what? Membranes. Okay. Then what is the other enzyme that's going to be what? Activated. Also the other enzyme that's going to be activated is what? The protease. Okay. The other enzyme that's going to be activated here is what? The protease. Okay. The protease is going to do two things. It will start breaking down the what? Instead of phospholipid, it's going to start breaking down the what? The cytoskeleton proteins. If it's breaking down the cytoskeleton protein, then it will lead to what? The breaking down of the what? The membrane as well. Okay. So what are we saying? So this one breaks down what? Cytoskeleton. So this one breaks down what? Cytoskeleton. Then if it is breaking down the cytoskeleton, then it is going to what? Break now down the membrane or the cell membrane, leading to what? Everything here, it will lead to what? Necrosis. Okay, necrosis. Because if you break down the cell membrane now, it will show that okay, now since there's an injury to the cell membrane severely, then that is now leading to necrosis and inflammatory response that's going to happen. Okay, so these are the important things that's going to happen. Then what else? There is another thing. There is another enzyme which is going to be activated. There is what we call endonucleases as well. Endonucleases. Okay. So these endonucleases, what do they do? Just from the word endonuclease, basically like the DNS. Okay, like the DNS, what are they going to start doing? They'll start breaking down the DNA like that. Okay, leading to the fragmentation of the what? The DNA. If the DNA now has undergone that process, what will be the result? The result will be either maybe apoptosis or necrosis. What are we saying? This one, endonucleases, they will just lead to what? Chromatin clamping. Okay, it it will lead to what? Chromatin clumping. Then basically it will lead to what? The same thing. It will lead to necrosis. Okay? Necrosis or apoptosis. What other thing is it going to activate? A lot of things it's going to do. There is another enzyme that's going to be activated here, but I'm not. It's going to activate something. It's going to activate ATP, ATPase. Okay, so ATPase, adenosine triphosphate enzyme. So those ATPases, they like what? Breaking down what? ATP. If they break down ATP, what's going to happen now? There will be depletion of what? ATP, leading to all these what? Things that we've talked about. Very, very important. So another last thing that we've talked about is what? Activation of what? ATP. Okay. What is the last thing now calcium is going to do? Another last thing it's going to do now is what? Activation of something as well. Not activation of something. Remember that is calcium can increase the mitochondrial permeability. So what are we saying? So it can lead to what? Increase in what? Mitochondria permeability. So it's going to lead to increase in the mitochondrial permeability. Remember that if there is increase in mitochondrial permeability, what do you think will happen? A lot of things will happen because we talked about that. So if there is increase in mitochondrial permeability, basically it will lead to what? Activation of what? Apoptotic factors and the inhibition of what? And apoptotic factors. Basically it's going to favor what? Apoptosis. Very, very important. So this increase in what? Mitochondrial permeability is going to favor what? Apoptosis. Apoptosis. Okay. What else apart from favoring apoptosis, that mitochondria, increasing the mitochondrial permeability, it can lead to what? Also, remember, further depletion of what? ATP. Further depletion of what? ATP, as we talked about here. We said this increase in the mitochondrial permeability can decrease the ATP, that can lead to what? Necrosis. And also this increase in permeability of mitochondria can also lead to what? Apoptosis. That's the same thing. Don't get confused. Okay? Very, very important point. Whew, that's a lot. Okay?